The industrial dishwasher roared like a jet engine as Jessica Chen slammed another rack of plates into its steaming maw. Grease splattered across her stained apron, and sweat dripped from her forehead into the scalding water below. Around her, the chaos of the naval station Norfolk's main galley reached its peak. Lunch rush for 3,000 sailors, and she was drowning in dirty dishes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Chen, move faster. We've got Admiral Blackwood's staff meeting in 20 minutes. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez barked from across the kitchen, his voice cutting through the clatter of pans and shouting cooks. Jessica didn't look up. She never did. For 8 months, she'd been the invisible woman in the corner, the one they assigned to the worst jobs because she never complained. Kitchen duty, latrine cleaning, inventory counts in sweltering storage rooms. If it was mindless and demeaning, Jessica Chen got the assignment. The other sailors had stopped trying to figure her out months ago. She was just another enlisted nobody who'd somehow screwed up bad enough to land permanent mess duty. Maybe she'd failed basic training. Maybe she'd mouthed off to the wrong officer. Nobody really cared enough to ask. But if they'd looked closer, they might have noticed things. The way she moved through the kitchen with military precision, never wasting a step. How her knife work was flawless when she helped prep vegetables, cut so clean and uniform they looked machine-made. The fact that she could lift 100-pound flour sacks like they weighed nothing, or how her posture remained perfectly straight even after 14-hour shifts. Most telling of all, they might have seen how she positioned herself in every room, always near an exit, always with a clear view of entrances, always ready for something none of them could imagine. The lunch rush exploded around her in organized chaos. Line cooks shouted orders in kitchen Spanish, while steam billowed from massive industrial pots. The grill station hissed and popped with burgers destined for hungry sailors who'd never know her name. Through it all, Jessica worked in her corner, invisible and efficient, her movements economical and practiced. "Chen, are you deaf? Admiral's plates need to be spotless." Rodriguez appeared beside her, his face flushed red from the heat and stress. "This isn't some strip mall diner. We're serving the base commander." Jessica nodded without making eye contact. "Yes, Chief." Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the kitchen noise. She'd perfected that tone, respectful enough to avoid trouble, forgettable enough to blend in. She grabbed the rack of china destined for the officers' dining room and began inspecting each plate under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind wandered to places far from this steaming kitchen. Places where the stakes were higher than clean dishes and punctual meal service. The officers' dining room was a different world from the enlisted mess hall. Polished wood tables, cloth napkins, actual silverware. Jessica had cleaned this room hundreds of times, always after hours when it was empty. She knew every corner, every blind spot, every entrance and exit. Old habits died hard. As she set the tables with mechanical precision, voices drifted in from the adjoining conference room. The staff meeting was beginning early, and through the partially open door, she could see uniformed figures taking their seats around a mahogany conference table. The security breach at Norfolk Station 3 is more serious than initially reported. A woman's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Jessica's hands stilled for just a moment on the water glass she was placing. Norfolk Station 3. She knew that designation, though she shouldn't have. It was compartmentalized information, the kind that didn't appear on any official base directory. The timing was too precise, another voice added. They knew exactly when the patrol rotation would leave the north perimeter unguarded. That's specialized reconnaissance, not lucky guessing. Her breathing remained steady, but something cold settled in her stomach. She continued setting the table, moving closer to the door as if adjusting chairs that didn't need adjusting. "Ma'am, with respect, how does a handful of insurgents get detailed intelligence on a classified naval installation?" This voice was younger, uncertain. "Our security protocols are compromised." The first voice again, sharper now. "Which is why we're implementing new screening procedures for all personnel. Every sailor on this base will undergo enhanced background verification within the next 60 days. Jessica's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Enhanced screening meant digital fingerprint analysis, retinal scans, cross-referencing with classified databases, the kind of thorough investigation that would reveal inconvenient truths about personnel files that had been carefully scrubbed clean. She finished the last place setting and moved toward the kitchen, but the conversation continued to drift through the door. The breach team used advanced maritime insertion techniques, the woman was saying. Underwater approach, synchronized timing, specialized equipment. This wasn't amateur hour. Whoever planned this has serious military training. As Jessica pushed through the swinging doors back into the kitchen, she caught a glimpse of the conference room through the gap. At the head of the table sat a woman in dress whites, silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, ribbons covering the left side of her uniform jacket. Even from this distance, something about her bearing commanded attention. "Chen, stop daydreaming and get those pots scrubbed." Rodriguez's voice snapped her back to reality. "We've got dinner prep in 2 hours and this place looks like a war zone." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd seen actual war zones, places where the chaos was measured in lives rather than meal services. But she grabbed the steel wool and attacked the burnt lasagna pans with the same methodical approach she brought to everything else. The afternoon wore on in its familiar rhythm: prep work, cleaning, inventory, more cleaning. The other kitchen staff worked around her like she was furniture, present but insignificant. Seaman Miller cracked jokes about weekend liberty plans. Petty Officer Jackson complained about his ex-wife's warrior. The civilian contractors discussed football scores and overtime pay. None of them noticed when Jessica paused in her work, head tilted slightly, as footsteps approached the kitchen. Military boots, confident stride, someone accustomed to being obeyed. She'd learned to read people by the way they moved, and these footsteps belonged to someone important. The kitchen fell silent as the door swung open. The woman from the conference room stepped inside, her presence immediately commanding attention from every person in the room. Her uniform was immaculate, her bearing that of someone who'd earned respect through decades of service. 2 junior officers flanked her, looking nervous to be in the presence of such obvious authority. "As you were," she said, though no one had actually come to attention. Her voice carried the kind of authority that made people stand up straighter without being asked. "I'm Admiral Patricia Blackwood, and I wanted to personally inspect the galley facilities." Jessica kept her head down, focusing on the pot she was scrubbing, but she could feel the Admiral's gaze sweeping across the kitchen, taking in every detail with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to finding problems others missed. "Chief Rodriguez, your operation here runs with impressive efficiency," the Admiral continued. "Feeding 3,000 personnel daily requires serious logistical coordination." "Thank you, ma'am," Rodriguez replied, his chest swelling with pride. "We run a tight ship in this galley." The Admiral moved through the kitchen with purpose, asking questions about supply chains, food safety protocols, and staff management. Her questions were intelligent and specific, the kind that revealed genuine understanding of military food service operations. Jessica remained focused on her work, but she tracked the Admiral's movement through peripheral vision and reflected surfaces. Old training never faded. Maintain situational awareness, know where everyone is, anticipate what comes next. The inspection was routine until the Admiral paused near the dishwashing station. Jessica felt the weight of her gaze and knew, with the certainty of someone who'd survived by reading people correctly, that her careful invisibility was about to end. "Sailor," the Admiral's voice was closer now, directed specifically at her. "What's your name?" Jessica looked up for the first time, meeting eyes that were sharp, intelligent, and somehow familiar. "Seaman Chen, ma'am." The Admiral studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across her expression. "How long have you been assigned to galley duty, Chen?" 8 months, ma'am." "Exclusively?" "Yes, ma'am." The question seemed simple enough, but Jessica could sense undercurrents she didn't understand. The Admiral's attention felt different from the casual inspection of a senior officer. This felt personal, though she couldn't imagine why. "You seem overqualified for dishwashing," the Admiral observed. The kitchen had gone quiet around them. Even the industrial dishwasher seemed to hum more softly, as if the machines themselves were listening to this unexpected conversation. Jessica chose her words carefully. "I've always worked in food service, ma'am." It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The Admiral's eyes narrowed slightly, and Jessica had the uncomfortable feeling that her carefully constructed persona was being dissected by someone who knew exactly what to look for. The moment stretched between them, tension building like steam pressure in the industrial ovens. Around them, the kitchen staff watched with the fascination of people witnessing something they didn't understand but knew was important. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Then the Admiral stepped closer, and everything changed. Admiral Blackwood's eyes locked onto Jessica's forearm as she reached across the steel prep table to grab a towel. For just an instant, the sleeve of her kitchen uniform rode up, revealing the edge of something dark beneath the fabric. Something that made the Admiral's breath catch in her throat. "Chen, roll up your sleeves," the Admiral commanded, her voice suddenly sharp with authority that cut through the kitchen noise like a blade. The request sent ripples of confusion through the galley staff. Chief Rodriguez stepped forward, clearly puzzled. "Ma'am, if there's a hygiene concern—" "This isn't about hygiene," the Admiral cut him off, never taking her eyes off Jessica. "Roll them up, now." Jessica hesitated, her hands stilling on the towel. Around them, the kitchen had gone completely silent except for the mechanical hum of refrigeration units. Every cook, every dishwasher, every food service worker was watching this bizarre standoff between the base's highest-ranking officer and their most forgettable colleague. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" Jessica asked, her voice carefully neutral. "That depends entirely on what you're hiding under those sleeves." The words hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Jessica felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on her. But more than that, she felt the weight of a carefully constructed life threatening to crumble. She'd spent 8 months building the perfect camouflage, invisible, unremarkable, forgotten. Now this Admiral was pulling at threads that could unravel everything. Slowly, deliberately, Jessica began rolling up her right sleeve. The fabric peeled back to reveal an arm that told a very different story than her current assignment suggested. The skin was marked with old scars, thin white lines that spoke of knife work, and deeper gouges that could only have come from shrapnel or worse. But it was the tattoo that made Admiral Blackwood take an involuntary step backward. There, stark black against Jessica's pale skin, was a design that shouldn't exist on the arm of a galley worker. An anchor intertwined with an eagle, wings spread wide. Above it, a trident pierced through rolling waves. Below, numbers that made the Admiral's blood run cold. 2019-2023. The kitchen erupted in whispers and confused muttering, but the Admiral raised her hand for silence. She moved closer, studying the tattoo with the intensity of someone reading a classified document. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of a direct order. Jessica met her gaze steadily. "I don't understand the question, ma'am." "The hell you don't." The Admiral's composure cracked slightly. "This is a DevGru insignia. Team designation, Trident 7. These dates," she paused, calculating, "Operation Deep Current." The words hit the kitchen like a concussion grenade. DEVRU, Development Group, was military speak for the Navy's most elite Special Operations Unit. The kind of assignment that required security clearances most people couldn't even pronounce. Chief Rodriguez stepped forward, his face flushed with confusion and growing anger. "Ma'am, there's gotta be some mistake. Chen's just a dishwasher. She failed out of advanced training, ended up in food service. I've got her personnel file right in my office." "Then your personnel file is either incomplete or fabricated," the Admiral replied without taking her eyes off Jessica. "Because this woman has markings that indicate she's been placed and done things that don't end with kitchen duty." The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Seaman Miller, who'd been cracking jokes about weekend plans just minutes earlier, now looked like he'd seen a ghost. Petty Officer Jackson had gone pale, suddenly realizing that the quiet woman he'd been ordering around might outrank half the officers on the base. Jessica finally spoke, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Have you?" The Admiral's voice carried decades of experience reading people, separating truth from carefully constructed lies. "Because I'm looking at a tattoo that's only given to operators who've completed missions that officially never happened. And those dates, they correspond to a very specific operation that resulted in 3 KIA and 1 MIA. She stepped even closer, lowering her voice so only Jessica could hear. The MIA was listed as Petty Officer First Class Jennifer Walsh, age 26, last seen during an underwater extraction gone wrong off the coast of Yemen. Jessica's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she said nothing. The Admiral continued, her voice carrying the weight of classified knowledge. Jennifer Walsh was declared dead after extensive search and rescue operations failed to locate her body. Her family was given full military honors at Arlington. Her name is on the wall. "Ma'am," Chief Rodriguez interjected, clearly struggling to follow a conversation that had veered into territory way above his pay grade. "I don't understand what's happening here, but Chen has been working in my kitchen for 8 months. I can vouch for her." "You can vouch for Jessica Chen," the Admiral corrected, a name that first appeared in military databases exactly 8 months ago, with a personnel record that's suspiciously thin for someone supposedly trained in food service. The accusation hung between them like a loaded weapon. Around the kitchen, the staff exchanged nervous glances, suddenly aware they were witnessing something far beyond their understanding. Jessica remained motionless, but her breathing had changed, deeper, more controlled. The kind of breathing taught in advanced combat training, designed to keep heart rate steady under extreme stress. "You want to know what I think?" The Admiral's voice rose slightly, carrying to every corner of the now silent kitchen. "I think someone very carefully constructed an identity for a person who needed to disappear. New name, new history, assignment to the most forgettable job on the most overlooked base in the fleet." She gestured to the industrial kitchen around them. "What better place to hide than somewhere everyone looks through you? Kitchen duty, cleaning details, inventory counts, jobs so beneath notice that nobody bothers to look twice at who's doing them." The logic was undeniable, and the implications were staggering. If the Admiral was right, then for 8 months they'd all been working alongside someone who'd operated at the highest levels of military special operations, someone who'd been declared dead and somehow emerged with a new identity. Jessica finally broke her silence. "Even if what you're suggesting were true, ma'am, what would be the point? Why would someone fake their death to wash dishes?" "Because," the Admiral replied, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "sometimes the most dangerous place to be is alive when your own people think you're dead." The words carried implications that sent chills through everyone present. This wasn't just about mistaken identity or administrative errors. This was about betrayal at the highest levels, about operations gone wrong, and people who knew too much. Chief Rodriguez looked like he was about to have a panic attack. "Ma'am, I need to contact my supervisor. This is way beyond." "Nobody contacts anybody." The Admiral's voice cut through his stammering like a knife. "This kitchen is now under security lockdown. Everyone present is restricted to base until further notice." The announcement sent shockwaves through the galley staff. What had started as a routine inspection had become something none of them understood, but all of them feared. Jessica remained perfectly still throughout the Admiral's pronouncement, but something in her posture had shifted. The careful invisibility was gone, replaced by the bearing of someone accustomed to command decisions and life-or-death situations. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "if you're going to make accusations, maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." The Admiral smiled grimly. "I couldn't agree more. But first, I want to see the rest of that artwork." Without waiting for permission, she reached toward Jessica's left sleeve. The motion was sudden enough that it triggered reflexes 8 months of dishwashing hadn't erased. Jessica's hand moved faster than anyone in the kitchen could follow, intercepting the Admiral's wrist with precision that spoke of thousands of hours of combat training. For a split second, the two women were frozen in a tableau that revealed everything. The Admiral's surprise at the speed of the response, and Jessica's immediate horror at having reacted with instincts she'd spent months suppressing. The kitchen erupted in chaos as the Admiral's security detail reached for weapons, but she raised her free hand, stopping them cold. "Stand down," she commanded, never taking her eyes off Jessica. "I think we've just answered several questions." Jessica released the Admiral's wrist and stepped back, but the damage was done. Her cover wasn't just blown, it had been obliterated by reflexes that belonged to someone far more dangerous than a dishwasher could ever be. "Jennifer Walsh," the Admiral said softly, "we need to talk." Admiral Blackwood's private office felt like a different world from the chaotic galley below. Mahogany furniture, maritime paintings, and walls lined with commendations from 30 years of naval service. But the most striking feature was the wall safe, currently open, revealing stacks of classified folders that shouldn't have existed outside of Pentagon vaults. Jessica sat in a leather chair across from the Admiral's desk, her kitchen uniform looking absurdly out of place in the formal setting. 2 Marine guards flanked the door, their presence making clear this was no longer a voluntary conversation. "Coffee?" Admiral Blackwood asked, pouring herself a cup from an antique silver service that looked like it belonged on a warship from another century. "I'm fine, ma'am." "I'm sure you are." The Admiral settled behind her desk, studying Jessica with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle that had haunted her for years. "Jennifer Walsh was 26 when she died. You appear to be roughly the same age." Jennifer Walsh was 5'7", brown eyes, and a distinctive scar on her left temple from a childhood accident. "Should I continue?" Jessica's hand unconsciously moved toward her hairline, where a thin scar disappeared beneath carefully styled bangs. The gesture lasted only a second, but it was enough. "Interesting," the Admiral murmured. "Most people don't know about that scar. It wasn't in her official military records, too minor to document. But it was in her medical file from when she was 12 years old and fell off her bike in Colorado Springs. The specificity of the information hit Jessica like a physical blow. This wasn't guesswork or fishing for information. The Admiral had access to files that should have been buried so deep that even she couldn't reach them. "Ma'am, I think you're confusing me with someone else." "Are I?" Admiral Blackwood opened one of the classified folders and spread photographs across her desk. These were taken during Operation Deep Current, classified satellite imagery from the mission that officially never happened. Jessica found herself looking at aerial views of a compound she'd never wanted to see again. The images were taken at different times, before, during, and after an operation that had cost her everything she'd once believed in. This facility, the Admiral pointed to a cluster of buildings surrounded by desert, was supposed to be a terrorist training camp. Intelligence indicated it was being used to plan attacks on naval installations throughout the Mediterranean. Jessica's breathing remained steady, but her hands had begun to tremble slightly. The Admiral noticed everything. 4 operators went in. Team Trident 7, the most elite maritime special operations unit in the Navy. Their mission was surgical: gather intelligence, plant surveillance equipment, extract without engagement. The Admiral's voice carried the weight of someone who'd authorized missions that haunted her sleep. But intelligence was wrong. This wasn't a terrorist camp. She pulled out another photograph, this one showing the interior of one of the buildings. Hospital beds, medical equipment, children's toys scattered across concrete floors. It was an orphanage, funded by international relief organizations housing 63 children displaced by regional conflicts. The Admiral's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And your team walked into a trap that someone in our own government had set." Jessica's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "Stop." "I can't stop." Not after 3 years of wondering how an operation I planned personally could go so catastrophically wrong. The Admiral leaned forward, her voice gaining intensity. Your team was supposed to be extracted at 0300 hours, but the extraction never came, did it? Instead, you found yourself surrounded by forces that knew exactly where you'd be and when you'd be there. The memories were flooding back now, despite Jessica's attempts to keep them buried. The sound of helicopter rotors that never arrived. The realization that their communication equipment had been sabotaged. The growing certainty that they'd been abandoned by their own people. Petty Officer Martinez was killed in the initial contact. Sniper fire from a position that indicated the enemy knew their planned route of approach. Petty Officer Thompson died trying to establish communication with command. And Petty Officer Rodriguez died in my arms, Jessica finished, her voice barely audible. Bled out from shrapnel while I tried to keep pressure on wounds that couldn't be fixed. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Admiral Blackwood leaned back in her chair, vindication and sorrow warring across her features. And Jennifer Walsh? Jessica was quiet for a long moment, staring at photographs that brought back the taste of desert sand and the smell of burning fuel. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd survived something that should have killed her. Jennifer Walsh died when she realized her own government had marked her for elimination. When she understood that the mission was never about intelligence gathering, it was about silencing a team that had learned too much about operations that powerful people wanted to keep buried. The Admiral's jaw tightened. What did you learn? That the facility we were supposed to infiltrate wasn't being used by terrorists. It was being used by American contractors conducting illegal weapons testing on displaced populations. Children mostly. The kind of experiments that violate every international treaty we've ever signed. The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. Even the Marine Guards, trained to remain impassive, exchanged glances that suggested they were hearing things above their security clearance. The orphanage was a cover, Jessica continued, her voice growing stronger as she finally gave voice to secrets she'd carried for 3 years. The children were test subjects for experimental weapons systems, chemical agents, psychological manipulation techniques, interrogation drugs, all funded through black-budget programs that officially didn't exist. Admiral Blackwood's face had gone pale. And your team discovered this during the operation? We discovered it because one of the children escaped and found us. A 10-year-old girl who could barely speak English, but who knew enough to beg us to help her friends. Jessica's hands clenched into fists. She showed us the medical facility, showed us what they were doing. So you deviated from mission parameters. We documented everything. Rodriguez was our communications specialist. He managed to upload terabytes of evidence to our backup servers before the attack started. Photos, video, medical records, financial documents, linking the operation to high-level government officials. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that reached far beyond a failed special operations mission. And then your extraction was canceled? Not canceled, sabotaged. Someone in command made the decision that it was easier to eliminate the team than to deal with what we discovered. Jessica's voice carried 3 years of rage that she'd kept carefully bottled up. The attack wasn't random. It was coordinated by people who knew our exact position, our equipment, our extraction timeline. How did you survive? Jessica rolled up her left sleeve, revealing more scars and part of another tattoo, coordinates etched in precise military formatting. I went into the water during the firefight, let them think I'd drowned. I swam 3 miles to a fishing village and convinced a local family to hide me while I recovered from my injuries. 3 miles? In full gear with combat injuries? I'm an excellent swimmer, ma'am. The understatement drew a grim smile from the Admiral. DevGru operators are required to swim 12 miles in full gear during Hell Week. I imagine 3 miles wounded was actually relatively manageable for someone with your training. It wasn't the swimming that nearly killed me. It was spending 6 months in a refugee camp, trying to figure out how to get home to a government that wanted me dead. Admiral Blackwood stood and walked to her window, staring out at the naval base that represented everything she dedicated her life to serving. How did you get back to the States? Carefully, very carefully. Jessica's voice carried hints of a story that was probably more harrowing than she was willing to share. It took me 2 years to create an identity that could pass basic scrutiny. Another year to figure out how to get close enough to people who might actually listen to what I had to say. And you chose kitchen duty? I chose invisibility. The best way to gather intelligence on a military base is to become someone nobody notices. Maintenance workers, kitchen staff, cleaning crews, they're the people who go everywhere and hear everything. Jessica gestured to her uniform. I've been mapping this base for 8 months, learning routines, identifying security weaknesses, figuring out who can be trusted. The Admiral turned back to face her. And what have you learned? That the same people who tried to kill my team are still operating, still conducting illegal operations under the cover of legitimate military activities. And they're using bases like this one to coordinate their activities. The accusation was explosive, but Admiral Blackwood didn't seem surprised. Instead, she returned to her desk and pulled out another folder, this one marked with security classifications that Jessica recognized as being among the highest levels of government secrecy. 3 weeks ago, I received intelligence indicating that Norfolk Station was being used as a staging area for black operations, the Admiral said. Operations that aren't authorized by any legitimate chain of command. Jessica leaned forward. What kind of operations? The kind that involves moving large amounts of unmarked equipment through military channels. The kind that requires specialists with very specific skill sets. The Admiral's eyes locked onto Jessica's. The kind that might require eliminating people who know too much about what happened to Team Trident 7. The implication was clear. Jessica's carefully constructed cover hadn't just been discovered by chance. Someone had been looking for her, and they were getting close. Ma'am, if what you're suggesting is true, it means you're in more danger now than you were when you decided to disappear. The Admiral's voice carried the urgency of someone who'd been piecing together a conspiracy that reached higher than either of them wanted to contemplate. But it also means you might be the key to stopping something much bigger than either of us realized. She pulled out a tablet and entered a security code that made the screen flash red before displaying classified intelligence reports. Over the past 18 months, 7 military personnel with connections to special operations have died in what were officially classified as accidents or suicides. All of them had security clearances that gave them access to information about black budget programs. Jessica felt ice forming in her stomach. They're cleaning the house? Systematically, and based on the timeline, you should have been eliminated months ago. The Admiral's eyes narrowed, which makes me wonder why you're still alive. The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Jessica had been asking herself the same thing, wondering why her carefully constructed anonymity had lasted as long as it had. Unless, the Admiral continued slowly, someone's been protecting you. Someone with enough authority to keep you off the target list while they figured out how to use you. The possibility was terrifying because it made sense. Jessica had survived too long, remained hidden too easily for someone not to be pulling strings behind the scenes. Ma'am, what exactly are you suggesting? Admiral Blackwood stood and walked to her safe, retrieving one final folder, this one sealed with wax and bearing stamps that indicate it required presidential-level authorization to open. I'm suggesting that Jennifer Walsh's death was faked by people who needed her alive for something much more important than revenge. She broke the seal and spread the contents across her desk. The presidential seal on the document folder seemed to burn into Jessica's retinas as Admiral Blackwood carefully arranged the contents across her desk. These weren't just classified files.
They were the kind of documents that toppled governments and started wars. Project Blackwater, the Admiral began, her voice carrying the weight of someone revealing state secrets that could cost her everything. A joint CIA-Pentagon operation initiated in 2018 under the previous administration. Officially, it was designed to develop enhanced interrogation techniques for high-value terrorist targets.
Jessica's blood ran cold as she recognized names and dates from her own past. Unofficially? Unofficially, it was a human experimentation program designed to develop psychological warfare capabilities that could be used on American citizens. The Admiral's voice carried disgust that 3 decades of military service couldn't quite suppress. The kind of research that was supposedly banned after the Church Committee investigations in the 1970s. The documents painted a picture of horror that made Jessica's own ordeal seem like a minor inconvenience. Research facilities disguised as refugee camps, medical experiments conducted under the guise of humanitarian aid, children used as test subjects for drugs and procedures that had no legitimate medical purpose. Your team wasn't sent to gather intelligence on terrorists, Admiral Blackwood continued. You were sent to document evidence of illegal human experimentation so that the program could be exposed and shut down. Someone in the Pentagon had developed a conscience and wanted to blow the whistle. Jessica studied a photograph that showed the same facility she'd infiltrated, but taken months earlier. In this image, the buildings were clearly marked with Red Cross symbols and International Aid Organization logos. The transformation into what she'd found there had been deliberate and systematic. Who ordered our mission? That's where things get complicated. The Admiral pulled out an organizational chart that looked like something from a paranoid conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Lines connected government officials, defense contractors, intelligence agencies, and private military companies in a web of relationships that defied official chains of command. The mission was authorized by Deputy Defense Secretary Marcus Cromwell, who was supposedly acting on intelligence provided by CIA Deputy Director Catherine Vance. But according to these documents, neither of them knew about the other's involvement. Jessica felt the familiar sensation of puzzle pieces clicking into place, the same feeling she'd gotten when she realized their extraction had been sabotaged. They were both being manipulated by someone with access to the highest levels of government and enough influence to coordinate operations across multiple agencies without leaving fingerprints. The Admiral pointed to a section of the organizational chart that had been highlighted in red. Someone who needed your team to discover the facility, but also needed to ensure you couldn't testify about what you found. The implications were staggering. Jessica's team hadn't just stumbled into a trap, they'd been carefully maneuvered into position by someone who understood exactly how their sense of duty and moral obligation would force them to act. The evidence Rodriguez uploaded before he died, Jessica said slowly. It wasn't destroyed. Quite the contrary. It was received by exactly the people it was intended to reach. Admiral Blackwood opened her laptop and entered a series of security codes that made the screen flash through multiple authentication protocols. Your teammate's final transmission didn't go to your operational command. It went directly to a task force that had been investigating Project Blackwater for over a year. The screen displayed a secure video conference interface showing 5 individuals in what appeared to be a secure government facility. Jessica recognized none of them, but their bearing and the military decorations visible on their uniforms suggested they represented the highest levels of the American defense establishment. Task Force Prometheus, the Admiral explained, assembled in secret by the Joint Chiefs of Staff after evidence emerged that black budget programs were being used to conduct illegal research on American soil. Your team's intelligence was the final piece they needed to shut down Project Blackwater permanently. Jessica stared at the screen, trying to process the idea that her teammates hadn't died for nothing, that their sacrifice had actually accomplished something meaningful. If they had the evidence, why wasn't I brought in to testify?
Because bringing you in would have exposed the task force's existence to the same people who had authorized your team's elimination. The Admiral's expression was grim. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone initially realized. People at the highest levels of government were involved in authorizing and covering up the illegal research. She pulled up another document, this one bearing the signature of someone whose name Jessica recognized from newspaper headlines and television news broadcasts. A signature that shouldn't have appeared on anything related to illegal human experimentation. The Vice President? Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. Among others, Project Blackwater was funded through a combination of black budget allocations and private defense contractor investments. The profit margins on developing new interrogation and psychological warfare techniques were enormous, and the ethical oversight was essentially non-existent. Admiral Blackwood displayed financial records that showed money flowing from government agencies to private companies and back again in patterns designed to obscure the true source and destination of the funds. The amounts were staggering, billions of dollars spent on research that violated every international treaty on human rights. Your survival became a problem because you represented the possibility of congressional investigation, media exposure, and international prosecution. The Admiral's voice carried the weight of someone who understood the political calculus that treated human lives as acceptable losses. But it also represented an opportunity. For what? For gathering additional evidence, for identifying all the players involved in the conspiracy, for building a case that could bring down not just the research program, but the entire network of officials who had authorized and covered it up. Jessica felt the familiar sensation of being manipulated, even by people who claimed to be on her side. You've been using me as bait. Task Force Prometheus has been protecting you while you unknowingly gathered intelligence on ongoing operations at this base. The Admiral's admission was delivered without apology. Your assignment to kitchen duty wasn't random. This facility has been used as a staging area for personnel and equipment related to continuing black operations. The revelation hit Jessica like a physical blow. For 8 months, she'd believed she was hiding from her enemies while secretly gathering information that might help her expose the truth. Instead, she'd been an unwitting asset in someone else's investigation. The security breach at Norfolk Station 3 that was discussed in the conference room earlier, she said slowly. That wasn't a random attack. It was a probe. Someone is testing the security protocols at facilities that have been used for black operations. We believe they're preparing for something much larger, possibly an attempt to extract or eliminate evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy. Admiral Blackwood displayed satellite imagery showing Norfolk Station 3, a facility that didn't appear on any official base maps. The images revealed a complex of buildings surrounded by multiple layers of security that seemed excessive for a routine military installation. Station 3 is where the evidence from your original mission is being stored, along with documentation of other illegal operations conducted over the past 5 years. If that facility is compromised, dozens of ongoing investigations could be derailed and hundreds of potential witnesses could be identified for elimination. Jessica studied the satellite images, her tactical training automatically analyzing approach routes, security weaknesses, and potential extraction points. And you think whoever is planning to hit Station 3 knows about my survival? We know they do. 3 days ago, we intercepted communications indicating that the remaining members of Team Trident 7 are being actively hunted. Someone has decided that the loose ends from Operation Deep Current need to be permanently resolved. The Admiral pulled out a tablet and showed Jessica intercepted message traffic that made her blood run cold. Her aliases, her current location, even details about her daily routine at the naval base. Someone had been conducting surveillance on her for weeks.
But here's what they don't know, Admiral Blackwood continued, a predatory smile crossing her features. Task Force Prometheus has been expecting this. We've been using your presence here to draw them out, to force them to reveal themselves by attempting to eliminate the one witness who could definitively prove their involvement in illegal operations. Jessica felt the pieces of a larger game clicking into place around her. I'm not just bait. I'm the trigger for a trap that's been 3 years in the making. The people who tried to kill your team are about to make their final move. When they do, we'll be ready. The Admiral's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd spent years planning revenge against people who had betrayed everything she'd sworn to protect. But Jessica had spent too many years surviving by trusting her instincts to ignore the warning bells that were suddenly screaming in her head. Something about this elaborate explanation felt too convenient, too perfectly designed to appeal to her desire for justice and closure. Ma'am, if Task Force Prometheus has been protecting me and gathering evidence for 3 years, why reveal all of this now? Why not just continue the surveillance until you had everything you needed? The Admiral's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but Jessica caught the change. It was the look of someone who'd been hoping a particular question wouldn't be asked. Because the timeline has accelerated. Intelligence indicates that the attack on Station 3 will happen within the next 72 hours. We need your help to stop it. What kind of help? Admiral Blackwood stood and walked to a wall safe that Jessica hadn't noticed before. She entered a combination and retrieved a case that bore the kind of warning labels associated with highly classified military equipment. The kind of equipment used for missions that officially never happened. You want me to go back into the field. I want you to finish what your team started 3 years ago, to get justice for Rodriguez, Martinez, and Thompson, to make sure their sacrifice meant something. The appeal was perfectly crafted to exploit Jessica's guilt, her loyalty to her fallen teammates, and her desire for revenge. It was also exactly the kind of manipulation that had gotten her team killed in the first place. And if I refuse? Admiral Blackwood's expression hardened. Then the people who murdered your team will succeed in covering up their crimes permanently. The evidence at Station 3 will be disbanded, and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder while children continue to be used as test subjects for illegal military research. The ultimatum was clear, but Jessica had learned to read between the lines of official statements. What the Admiral wasn't saying was that refusal probably meant elimination. People who knew what Jessica knew didn't get to walk away and return to civilian life. When do we start? The Admiral smiled, but there was something cold in her expression that hadn't been there before. We already have. The moment you walked into my office, you became an active participant in an operation that's been 3 years in the making. She pressed a button on her desk, and the door opened to admit the 2 Marine guards. But now they were carrying equipment cases and wearing the kind of tactical gear associated with special operations missions. Welcome back to active duty, Jennifer Walsh. Your country needs you to disappear one more time. As Jessica looked at the Marines' faces, she realized with growing alarm that she didn't recognize either of them. Their uniforms bore no unit insignia, no name tags, no identifying markers of any kind. They could have been anyone, working for anyone. The trap she'd thought was being set for her enemies might actually have been set for her all along. The elevator descended past floors that didn't appear on any building schematic Jessica had memorized during her months of reconnaissance. Sub-basement levels that required biometric scanning at each checkpoint. Corridors lined with electromagnetic shielding that blocked all external communications. This wasn't just a secure facility. It was a black site hidden beneath a routine naval administrative building. The 2 unmarked Marines flanked her as they walked through corridors that felt more like a maximum security prison than a military installation. Their equipment was pristine, expensive, and bore none of the wear patterns that came from actual field deployment. These weren't combat veterans. They were corporate security specialists dressed in military camouflage. "Ma'am," Jessica addressed Admiral Blackwood as they approached a heavy steel door marked only with biohazard symbols. "What exactly is the operational timeline for this mission?"
All briefing materials will be provided once we reach the secure facility. The Admiral's response was crisp, professional, and completely unsatisfying. Jessica's tactical training screamed warnings as they passed through the final checkpoint. The facility they entered looked like something from a science fiction movie. Banks of computers displaying real-time satellite feeds, tactical displays showing military installations around the globe, and workstations manned by personnel in civilian clothing who looked up nervously as their group passed. But it was the wall display that made Jessica's blood freeze. A massive screen showing surveillance footage from dozens of locations, including detailed interior views of her apartment above the auto shop, the community center where she'd attended support group meetings, even the kitchen where she'd worked for 8 months. Someone had been watching every moment of her carefully constructed new life. "Impressive operation," she said quietly, her voice betraying none of the rage building inside her. "How long have you been running surveillance on me?" Admiral Blackwood gestured toward a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the surveillance operation. "Since the day you first applied for your position at the base. Every conversation, every routine, every contact has been monitored and analyzed." They settled around a conference table that could have accommodated 20 people, but currently held only 5. Admiral Blackwood, Jessica, and 3 individuals who hadn't been introduced, but whose bearing suggested intelligence community backgrounds rather than military service. "Jennifer Walsh," the Admiral began, "meet the actual Task Force Prometheus." The man at the head of the table was older, silver-haired, with the kind of expensive suit that suggested government contractors rather than civil servants. He studied Jessica with the cold calculation of a piece of equipment rather than a human being. "Miss Walsh, I'm Director Harrison from the Defense Intelligence Agency. This is Dr. Sarah Chen from DARPA's Biological Technologies Office, and Mr. James Mitchell from Blackwater Security Solutions." The introductions hit Jessica like hammer blows. DARPA's Biological Technologies Office was responsible for some of the most ethically questionable research programs in the government. Blackwater Security Solutions was the private military contractor that had been involved in some of the worst human rights violations of the past 2 decades.
"These are the people who ordered my team's elimination," she said, her voice deadly calm. "These are the people who authorized your team's mission and have been managing the consequences ever since," Director Harrison corrected. "Operation Deep Current was never about shutting down illegal research. It was about acquiring that research for legitimate American defense applications." Dr. Chen opened a tablet and displayed images that made Jessica's stomach turn. Medical research data, psychological profiles, experimental results, all derived from the human experimentation that had been conducted at the facility her team had infiltrated. The research conducted under Project Blackwater produced breakthrough advances in psychological manipulation, pharmacological behavior modification, and neural interface technology, Dr. Chen explained with the clinical detachment of someone discussing laboratory mice. "Your team's mission was to acquire that research data before international oversight committees could shut down the program." Jessica felt the world shifting beneath her as the true scope of the betrayal became clear. You weren't trying to stop human experimentation, you were trying to steal it. We were trying to ensure that groundbreaking research conducted with American taxpayer funding would benefit American national security rather than being abandoned due to squeamishness about research methodologies. Mr. Mitchell interjected. His voice carried the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to justifying atrocities as necessary business decisions. Admiral Blackwood leaned forward, her expression carrying none of the moral outrage she'd displayed in her office. "Your team's emotional response to discovering the research methodology was anticipated and planned for. The psychological profiles indicated that you would feel compelled to document and report the experiments, providing us with comprehensive intelligence while simultaneously justifying the elimination of personnel who might later develop ethical qualms about the mission. The revelation was so coldly calculated that Jessica almost admired its efficiency. Her team's moral convictions had been weaponized against them, turned into a mechanism for their own destruction. Rodriguez's final transmission, she said slowly, it didn't go to Task Force Prometheus, it went to you. Rodriguez was an excellent communications specialist, Director Harrison confirmed. The encryption protocols he used were sophisticated enough to convince your team that the intelligence was being transmitted to legitimate oversight authorities, but simple enough for us to decrypt and analyze in real time. Dr. Chen displayed the actual intelligence that Rodriguez had died trying to transmit. Medical records, experimental protocols, financial documentation, all of it meticulously cataloged and integrated into ongoing research programs that had expanded far beyond the original Syrian facility. The children who were being used as test subjects, Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper. They were relocated to more secure research facilities where their participation in ongoing studies could be properly managed. Dr. Chen replied with the same clinical detachment she might use to discuss laboratory equipment. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the horror of what she was describing. The children Jessica's team had tried to save had been moved to other facilities where the experimentation could continue without the risk of discovery by international observers. And their research contributed to significant advances in our understanding of developmental neurology and pharmacological intervention strategies. Their sacrifice has served a greater purpose than they could have comprehended. Jessica felt 3 years of carefully controlled rage building to a breaking point. The people sitting around this table weren't just the ones who had betrayed her team. They were the ones who had continued the very research that Team Trident 7 had died trying to expose. So why am I here? Why keep me alive for 3 years just to reveal all of this now? Director Harrison smiled with the satisfaction of someone unveiling a masterpiece. Because the research programs that began in Syria have evolved far beyond what anyone initially envisioned. We've developed technologies that could revolutionize not just military operations, but social control on a massive scale. He gestured toward the surveillance displays, showing feeds from dozens of locations around the world. Psychological manipulation techniques that can be deployed through social media algorithms. Pharmacological agents that can be distributed through municipal water supplies. Neural interface technologies that can influence behavior through electromagnetic fields embedded in consumer electronics. The scope of what he was describing was breathtaking in its implications. Not just weapons of war, but tools of total population control. The problem, Dr. Chen continued, is that these technologies require field testing on unwitting subjects to validate their effectiveness. We need operational environments where test subjects can be observed and analyzed over extended periods without their knowledge or consent. Jessica felt ice forming in her veins as the pieces clicked into place. You've been using me as a test subject. You've been participating in a comprehensive 3-year study of psychological resilience, social adaptation, and behavioral modification under conditions of controlled stress, Dr. Chen confirmed. Your responses to various stimuli have provided invaluable data on how trained operatives adapt to civilian environments while maintaining operational readiness.
Admiral Blackwood opened another folder, this one containing psychological evaluations, behavioral analysis reports, and medical data that could only have been gathered through constant invasive surveillance. Every interaction you've had, every decision you've made, every emotional response you've displayed has been monitored, recorded, and analyzed. Your apartment was equipped with sensors that tracked everything from your sleep patterns to your neurochemical responses to different types of stress. The violation was so complete, so fundamental, that Jessica struggled to process it. For 3 years, she'd believed she was hiding, recovering, planning her next move. Instead, she'd been living in an elaborate laboratory where every moment was being studied by the same people who had murdered her teammates. The kitchen assignment, the support group meetings, even the specific personnel you interacted with on the base, all of it was carefully orchestrated to test different variables and gather data on your psychological adaptation patterns. Mr. Mitchell displayed charts and graphs that reduced Jessica's life to statistical data points: stress responses, social interactions, behavioral modifications. 3 years of her existence translated into research data that would be used to develop more effective ways to manipulate and control other human beings. But the most valuable aspect of the study, Director Harrison continued, was observing how a highly trained operative would respond to gradually discovering that everything she believed about her situation was false. How she would react to learning that her survival was not due to her own skills, but to our protection. How she would process the revelation that her teammates' deaths served a purpose greater than their individual lives. Jessica realized with growing horror that even this conversation was part of the experiment. Her reactions to these revelations are being monitored and analyzed in real time, adding to the database of information about human psychological breaking points. The study concludes today, Dr. Chen announced. We have sufficient data to begin implementing the behavioral modification protocols on a larger scale. Your participation is no longer required. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise what she was really saying. Jessica had served her purpose as a test subject and was now scheduled for elimination.
However, Director Harrison interjected, your unique skill set and your demonstrated psychological resilience make you an ideal candidate for voluntary participation in the next phase of our research program. He displayed images of facilities around the world, some disguised as corporate headquarters, others as research universities, a few that appeared to be military installations in countries Jessica didn't recognize. We're expanding the behavioral modification research to include larger population groups, entire communities, small cities, eventually regions of strategic interest to American national security objectives. His voice carried the enthusiasm of someone describing a particularly promising business venture. We need field operatives who can blend into target populations while implementing and monitoring the effectiveness of our intervention protocols. Jessica stared at the images, understanding with perfect clarity what they were offering her. The chance to become an active participant in the kind of systematic human experimentation that she'd spent 3 years believing she was trying to expose. And if I refuse? Admiral Blackwood's expression hardened. Then you become a security liability that needs to be permanently resolved. The research data we've gathered from your participation is too valuable to risk being compromised by someone with both the knowledge and the motivation to expose our operations. The threat was delivered with the casual efficiency of someone ordering lunch. Jessica's life had been reduced to a cost-benefit analysis, where her survival depended entirely on her willingness to help expand the very programs that had destroyed everything she'd once believed in. But as she looked around the table at the faces of people who had spent 3 years studying her every response, Jessica realized they had made one critical error in their analysis. They had assumed that learning the truth about her situation would break her, would force her to accept their offer out of desperation or fear. Instead, it had given her something she'd lacked for 3 years: absolute certainty about who her enemies were and what they were capable of. "I need some time to consider your offer," she said quietly. Director Harrison smiled. "Of course, we understand this is a significant decision. You have until tomorrow morning to provide your answer." As the meeting concluded and Jessica was escorted back toward the surface levels, she began mentally cataloging everything she'd seen and heard: the facility layout, the personnel, the security protocols, the scope of the research programs. All of it would be valuable intelligence for people who might actually be interested in stopping this operation rather than expanding it. For 3 years, she'd been planning how to expose the truth about her team's mission. Now she had a much bigger truth to expose, and access to evidence that could bring down not just the people in this room, but the entire network of government agencies and private contractors who were turning human beings into laboratory subjects on a massive scale. The elevator rose toward the surface, but Jessica's mind was already working through the tactical challenges of what she was about to attempt. She had perhaps 12 hours before her refusal to cooperate would trigger her elimination. 12 hours to gather evidence, establish communication with legitimate oversight authorities, and escape from what was essentially a black site prison disguised as a routine military facility. It was exactly the kind of impossible mission that Team Trident 7 had specialized in. The only difference was that this time she would be operating alone against people who knew her capabilities and had been studying her psychological responses for 3 years. But they had made one crucial miscalculation in their analysis. They had studied how Jessica Chen, the broken survivor, would respond to stress and manipulation. They had no data on how Jennifer Walsh, the operational specialist, would respond when she finally stopped running and decided to fight back. The holding room they'd placed Jessica in was designed to look like comfortable quarters: a bed, desk, small bathroom, even a television playing news channels. But the reinforced walls, electronic locks, and absence of windows made its true purpose clear. She was in a sophisticated prison cell, and her captors wanted her to understand that escape was impossible. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, apparently watching a news broadcast about congressional hearings on defense spending, while actually using the reflection in the television screen to monitor the hallway beyond her door. Guard rotations every 2 hours, biometric scanners at each checkpoint, pressure sensors in the floor that would detect any unauthorized movement. But 3 years of working in the kitchen had taught her things her captors hadn't anticipated. Industrial facilities like military bases require extensive infrastructure: ventilation systems, electrical conduits, water lines, waste management. Places where someone small enough and determined enough could move without triggering the security systems designed to monitor normal human traffic. The first step was creating a diversion that would draw attention away from her location without immediately triggering a full lockdown. Jessica had noticed that the facility's fire suppression system was linked to the main security network, a cost-saving measure that created a vulnerability someone with her knowledge could exploit. She began by carefully removing the smoke detector from her ceiling, using the metal bed frame as a stepladder and her shoelaces as tools. Military-grade smoke detectors were designed to resist tampering, but they weren't designed to resist someone with extensive training in electronic warfare and demolitions. The wiring behind the smoke detector connected to a central monitoring system that controlled not just fire suppression, but emergency lighting, door locks, and communication protocols. By creating a specific pattern of electrical interference, Jessica could trigger a cascade failure that would look like a system malfunction rather than sabotage. As she worked, memories of Rodriguez flooded back. He'd been the team's electronics specialist, the one who could hack any system or improvise solutions from whatever materials were available. "Every building is just a collection of systems," he'd once told her during a mission in Eastern Europe, "and every system has weak points that nobody thinks to protect because they assume no one would be crazy enough to exploit them." 20 minutes later, the facility's emergency lighting activated as smoke detectors throughout the complex began reporting false readings.
The security system, designed to prioritize life safety over security concerns, automatically unlocked fire doors and disabled certain electronic barriers. Jessica had perhaps 3 minutes before the technical staff identified the malfunction and began restoring normal operations. 3 minutes to traverse a facility designed to prevent exactly what she was attempting. The ventilation shaft above her room connected to the main air handling system, which in turn provided access to every part of the underground complex. It was a tight fit. The space had been designed for airflow, not human passage, but Jessica had maintained the physical conditioning that had gotten her through DevGru training years earlier. Moving through the ventilation system required a combination of technical rock climbing skills and the kind of spatial awareness that came from years of military training. Every sound had to be minimized, every movement calculated to avoid sensors or structural failures that would reveal her location. The layout of the facility made more sense from above. She could see into the main operations center, where technicians were frantically trying to identify the source of the system malfunction. She could observe the security checkpoint rotations and identify the locations of personnel who weren't part of the regular base staff. But it was what she overheard that changed everything. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Baltimore facility," a technician reported to Director Harrison, who was standing in the center of the operations center looking extremely displeased with the technical difficulties. 40 minutes? Harrison's voice carried the kind of fury reserved for subordinates who delivered unacceptable news. "Sir, we initially classified it as a routine maintenance issue, but we're now detecting similar anomalies at our facilities in Denver, Phoenix, and Jacksonville."
Jessica felt her breath catch. There were other facilities, other operations running simultaneously, and someone was apparently conducting coordinated attacks against all of them. Status of our research subjects at those locations. Dr. Chen's voice was crisp, clinical, treating human beings like laboratory equipment that might need to be relocated. Baltimore facility housed 47 subjects in various stages of behavioral modification protocols. Denver had 32. Phoenix had 19. Jacksonville had 56. The technician's report was delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss inventory management. All subjects are currently unaccounted for. Harrison turned to Admiral Blackwood with an expression that could have melted steel. "How is this possible? Our security protocols were designed to prevent exactly this kind of coordinated action." "Sir, our preliminary analysis suggests the attacks are being conducted by individuals with extensive knowledge of our facility designs and operational procedures." Admiral Blackwood's response was carefully neutral, but Jessica could hear the underlying tension. The timing and methodology indicate someone with access to classified information about our security systems. Through the ventilation grate, Jessica watched Director Harrison's face as he processed the implications. Inside information. Someone with access to our operational files has turned against the program. "It appears so, sir. We're implementing enhanced security protocols at all remaining facilities and initiating background investigations of all personnel with access to sensitive information." Jessica realized with growing excitement that she wasn't alone. Someone else, multiple someone else's, were actively working to shut down the research program and rescue the people being held as unwilling test subjects. "What's the status of our primary asset?" Harrison asked, and Jessica knew he was referring to her. "Secure in her quarters. Psychological monitoring indicates she's experiencing stress responses consistent with someone processing the decision we've presented her." Admiral Blackwood's voice carried confidence that Jessica found satisfying to undermine. "Her biometric readings suggest she'll likely accept our offer rather than face elimination." The irony was that the biometric readings they were monitoring were probably accurate. Jessica's heart rate was elevated, her stress hormones were spiking, and her neurological activity was intense. They just didn't understand that the stress was coming from tactical planning rather than fear. And the neurological activity was her mind working through the logistics of what she was about to attempt. Sir, a technician interrupted. We're receiving an encrypted transmission on emergency frequency 77 Alpha. The caller is identifying himself as Colonel Marcus Webb, U.S. Army Special Operations Command. Jessica's blood ran cold. Marcus Webb was the same man who'd challenged her story in the support group meeting, the one who'd called military police to report her for stolen valor. Either he was part of this conspiracy, or something much more complicated was happening. "Put him through," Harrison ordered. The main display screen activated to show a man Jessica recognized, but he looked very different from the drunken veteran she'd encountered months earlier. This Marcus Webb was wearing a military dress uniform with ribbons and decorations that indicated genuine special operations experience. His bearing was that of someone accustomed to command authority, not the broken-down alcoholic who'd been attending support group meetings. Director Harrison, Webb's voice carried the authority of someone delivering official government orders. "I'm calling to inform you that Operation Nightfall is being terminated immediately under direct authorization from the Secretary of Defense." "Colonel Webb, I don't believe you have authority to—" "I have authority granted by Executive Order 12947, which authorizes the immediate shutdown of any research program determined to violate international treaties on human experimentation." Webb's interruption was delivered with the confidence of someone holding unassailable high cards. "Your facilities are currently being secured by joint task forces from multiple agencies." Jessica watched Harrison's face as he processed this information. The man had spent his career manipulating government bureaucracy to authorize illegal activities, and now that same bureaucracy was being turned against him. Furthermore, Webb continued, all personnel associated with Project Blackwater and related research programs are being detained for questioning regarding violations of federal law, international treaties, and military codes of conduct. "This is completely unacceptable," Dr. Chen interjected. "The research we're conducting is vital to national security interests. Congressional oversight committees have been fully briefed on our activities." Webb's expression hardened. "Dr. Chen, the congressional oversight committees were briefed on fabricated information designed to conceal the true nature of your research. When presented with actual evidence of what you've been doing, those same committees authorize the immediate termination of all related programs." Through the ventilation system, Jessica could see that the operations center had erupted into controlled chaos. Personnel were frantically working at computer terminals, attempting to execute what appeared to be emergency data destruction protocols. "Sir," a technician reported, "we're losing remote access to research data stored at external facilities. Someone is systematically locking us out of our own systems." Harrison's composure finally cracked. "How long do we have before the facility is compromised?" "Based on the timeline of events at other locations, approximately 90 minutes, Admiral Blackwood replied. "We need to initiate emergency evacuation procedures and activate the dead man switch protocols." Jessica felt ice forming in her stomach. Dead man switch protocols in this context almost certainly meant eliminating evidence, including human evidence, like research subjects who could testify about what had been done to them. "Negative," Webb's voice cut through their planning. "Any attempt to harm research subjects or destroy evidence will result in federal charges that include premeditated murder. We have real-time surveillance of your facility and will respond immediately to any aggressive actions." The standoff was reaching a critical point. Jessica could see through the grate that Harrison was weighing his options, trying to calculate whether he could eliminate evidence and escape before being captured. But she also realized that her own situation had become significantly more dangerous. If the facility was about to be raided by legitimate government forces, her captors might decide that killing her was preferable to allowing her to testify about what she'd witnessed. The ventilation shaft she was hiding in provided access to multiple areas of the complex, including the data storage facilities where evidence of the illegal research was being kept. If she could reach those areas and prevent the destruction of that evidence, it could provide the kind of proof that would ensure prosecutions rather than cover-ups. But first, she needed to understand exactly who Marcus Webb really was, and how he'd managed to organize what appeared to be a multi-agency operation to shut down a program that had been operating with apparent government authorization. Jessica began moving through the ventilation system toward the communication center, where she might be able to access external communication systems and establish contact with the forces that were apparently coming to shut down the facility. As she crawled through the narrow shaft, she could hear alarms beginning to sound throughout the complex. The emergency lockdown was being activated, which meant her captors had decided to prioritize destroying evidence over following the orders they'd received to preserve it. She had perhaps 30 minutes before the facility's data destruction protocols would eliminate all evidence of the illegal research. 30 minutes to prevent the cover-up of a conspiracy that had cost her teammates their lives and had subjected hundreds of innocent people to experimental procedures that violated every principle of human decency. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't operating alone. Somewhere outside this underground complex, people with legitimate authority were working to shut down the same program she'd been trying to expose. People who might actually be interested in justice rather than exploitation. The question was whether she could stay alive long enough for them to reach her, and whether she could preserve the evidence that would ensure the people responsible for these crimes would face consequences rather than simply being relocated to continue their work elsewhere. As she reached the communication center access point, Jessica began to hear something that gave her hope. Through the facility's internal communication system, she could hear the sound of approaching helicopters and the tactical radio chatter of military units that appeared to be legitimate government forces rather than private contractors. Colonel Marcus Webb hadn't been bluffing. The cavalry was actually coming. Now she just had to survive long enough for them to arrive. The sound of explosives echoing through the facility's upper levels told Jessica that the rescue operation had begun in earnest. Through the ventilation system, she could hear the distinct acoustic signature of breaching charges, the kind used by special operations teams to rapidly clear fortified positions. But her immediate priority was the data storage facility directly below her current position. Through the grate, she could see Dr. Chen and 3 technicians frantically working to complete the evidence destruction protocols before the facility could be fully secured. "Initiate thermal deletion on servers 7 through 15, Dr. Chen ordered, her clinical composure finally showing cracks under pressure. Priority is the behavioral modification research data and the subject psychological profiles." Jessica realized with growing urgency that they were trying to destroy the evidence that could prove what had been done to hundreds of people over the past 5 years. Without that data, prosecutions would be impossible, and the victims would have no way to prove what had been done to them. The ventilation grate was secured with standard military hardware, designed to prevent casual tampering but not to resist someone with her training and motivation. Using techniques Rodriguez had taught her years ago, Jessica was able to manipulate the locking mechanism using improvised tools created from her belt buckle and shoelaces. The drop from the ventilation shaft to the floor was 12 feet, manageable for someone with her physical conditioning, but it would put her in direct confrontation with 4 people in a room with only one exit. What she needed was a way to disable the data destruction process without getting killed in the attempt. The facility's fire suppression system provided the answer. The server room was equipped with a clean agent fire suppression system designed to extinguish fires without damaging electronic equipment. But if someone could trigger the system manually, it would flood the room with inert gas that would incapacitate human occupants while preserving the computer systems. Jessica located the manual activation switch for the fire suppression system, positioned near the ventilation shaft she was hiding in. The challenge was that activating it would also incapacitate her, unless she could find a way to protect herself from the gas while ensuring the technicians couldn't escape before losing consciousness. The solution required timing that left no margin for error. Jessica dropped through the ceiling grate just as Dr. Chen initiated the thermal deletion sequence for the final bank of servers. The surprise of her sudden appearance bought her precious seconds as the technicians tried to process what was happening. "Step away from the computers," Jessica commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in crisis situations. Dr. Chen's response was to reach for what appeared to be an emergency communication device, probably a way to alert security that their prisoner had escaped. Jessica moved with the speed that had earned her a place on DevGru, disarming Dr. Chen and securing the communication device before any of the technicians could react. "The deletion process has already been initiated," Dr. Chen said, with the smug satisfaction of someone who believed she'd accomplished her objective. "In 3 minutes, all research data will be permanently destroyed." Jessica looked at the server displays, calculating how much time she had to reverse the deletion process. The thermal deletion system was designed to be irreversible once initiated, the kind of failsafe that ensured sensitive data couldn't be recovered even if the physical servers were captured. But Rodriguez had taught her that every computer system had backdoors that its designers never intended to create. Emergency recovery protocols, diagnostic systems, backup procedures that could be exploited by someone who understood how the technology actually worked. "Dr. Chen, you're going to help me reverse the deletion process." "Absolutely not. Even if I wanted to help you, which I don't, the process can't be reversed once initiated. It's a security feature designed to prevent exactly what you're attempting." Jessica activated the manual fire suppression system. The room immediately began filling with clean agent gas, a substance that would render everyone unconscious within 60 seconds, but wouldn't cause permanent harm. Jessica had positioned herself near the emergency air supply vent, giving her perhaps 90 seconds of normal breathing before she would also succumb to the gas. "You have 40 seconds to start reversing the deletion process before you lose consciousness. I have emergency air supply, so I can wait for the rescue team to revive you, and then we can have this conversation again. But if you help me now, we can save the research data and ensure the people of these experiments get the justice they deserve." The technicians looked to Dr. Chen for guidance, but she was already showing signs of impairment from the gas. Her movements were becoming sluggish, her speech slurred. The abort sequence is..." She struggled to maintain consciousness long enough to provide the information. "Emergency override protocol 77 Alpha requires biometric confirmation from 2 senior staff members." Jessica realized that even with Dr. Chen's cooperation, she couldn't complete the abortion sequence alone. She needed another senior staff member, and they were all either unconscious or had evacuated the facility. But as the last technician lost consciousness, Jessica noticed something that changed her understanding of the situation. One of the server displays was showing that the deletion process had stopped at 67% completion. Not because of anything she'd done, but because someone else had initiated an emergency override from an external location. The communication system in the server room crackled to life. "This is Colonel Webb. We have established remote access to the facility's computer systems and are implementing data preservation protocols. All research subjects have been secured and are receiving medical attention." Jessica used the emergency communication system to respond. "Colonel Webb, this is Jennifer Walsh. I'm in the main data storage facility. Dr. Chen and her technicians are unconscious but alive. The thermal deletion process was partially completed but appears to have been stopped by external intervention." "Confirmed, Jennifer. Our technical team gained access to the servers through the facility's emergency backup systems. We've recovered approximately 85% of the research data, including psychological profiles of all known test subjects and financial records linking the program to government officials and private contractors." The relief Jessica felt was overwhelming. After 3 years of believing that the evidence of these crimes had been destroyed, it was finally being preserved and would be available for prosecution. "What's the status of the facility?" she asked. "Secured. Director Harrison, Admiral Blackwood, and Mr. Mitchell are in custody. We've also detained 12 other personnel associated with the research programs. Dr. Chen will be added to that list when she regains consciousness." Jessica looked around the server room where she'd spent the past few minutes fighting to prevent the destruction of evidence that could bring justice to hundreds of victims. It was hard to believe that after 3 years of running, hiding, and planning, the conspiracy that had destroyed her team was finally being exposed. Jennifer, Colonel Webb's voice carried a note of personal concern rather than official business. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I'm operational, sir, but I have questions about how this operation was coordinated and how you were able to penetrate security at multiple facilities simultaneously. There was a pause before Webb responded. That's a conversation we need to have in person. Can you make your way to the surface level? We have medical teams standing by to check you over, and then we'll conduct a full debriefing. As Jessica made her way through the facility toward the surface, she passed areas where other personnel were being detained by what appeared to be legitimate military and federal law enforcement officers. The contrast with the unmarked security personnel who had been guarding her earlier was stark. These were people with proper identification, unit insignia, and the bearing of legitimate government agents. The main operations center had been transformed into a command post for the raid, with FBI and military personnel documenting evidence and interviewing detainees. Jessica could see Admiral Blackwood sitting in restraints, her expression one of someone who couldn't quite believe that decades of careful planning had been undone in a matter of hours. When Jessica finally reached the surface level, she found herself in a world that looked completely different from the underground complex where she'd been held. Military vehicles, federal agency cars, ambulances, and helicopters filled what had appeared to be a routine administrative parking lot. The scope of the response indicated that this operation had been planned at the highest levels of government. Colonel Marcus Webb was waiting for her near the main entrance to the building. In person, he looked exactly like the man who had challenged her in the support group meeting months earlier, but his bearing and demeanor were completely different. "Jennifer Walsh," he said, extending his hand in greeting. "It's good to finally meet you under better circumstances." "Colonel Webb, I have to admit, your performance at the support group meeting was very convincing. I actually thought you were a drunken veteran with anger issues." Webb smiled grimly. "That was the general idea. We needed someone inside the support group who could monitor your situation and provide early warning if your cover was compromised. My orders were to maintain surveillance while ensuring you remained safe until we could coordinate this operation." Jessica felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "How long have you been tracking me?" "Since approximately 6 months after you first established your civilian identity. We knew that survivors of Team Trident 7 might attempt to resurface, and we had monitoring protocols in place to identify anyone who fit the psychological and behavioral profiles." They walked toward a mobile command unit where Jessica could see multiple officials in military and civilian dress waiting to conduct what appeared to be a very important debriefing. "Sir, how did you coordinate simultaneous raids on multiple facilities? Dr. Chen mentioned that there were research sites in Baltimore, Denver, Phoenix, and Jacksonville." "The operation you witnessed today was 3 years in the making," Webb explained. "After Team Trident 7's mission went wrong, a small group of senior officials began investigating how an operation with that level of security clearance could have been compromised. What we discovered was a conspiracy that reached much higher in the government than anyone initially suspected." He gestured toward the command unit, where Jessica could see officials she recognized from newspaper photos and television news broadcasts. "The investigation has been conducted at the highest levels of classification, with direct oversight from the Secretary of Defense and the Attorney General. When we finally had enough evidence to act, we coordinated with international allies to simultaneously shut down all related research programs." Jessica stopped walking. "International allies?" "Jennifer, the research programs you discovered weren't limited to American facilities. We found evidence of similar operations in 7 countries, all coordinated through the same network of government officials and private contractors. The children you tried to save in Syria were part of an international human trafficking operation designed to provide test subjects for multiple research programs." The scope of what he was describing was almost impossible to comprehend. Not just a conspiracy within the American government, but an international network conducting human experimentation on a massive scale. "The good news," Webb continued,
is that today's operations have shut down all known facilities and resulted in the rescue of over 400 people who were being held as unwilling research subjects. The evidence we've recovered will support prosecutions in multiple countries and should ensure that the people responsible face consequences proportional to their crimes.
As they reached the command unit, Jessica could see through the windows that officials were reviewing what appeared to be extensive documentation of the illegal research programs. Financial records, medical data, correspondence between government officials and private contractors, the kind of evidence that could support prosecutions at the highest levels. "What happens now?" Jessica asked. "Now, you help us finish what your team started 3 years ago," Webb replied. "Your testimony, combined with the evidence we've recovered, will be crucial for ensuring successful prosecutions. You'll also be involved in helping us identify other potential research sites and locate any remaining victims who might need rescue." For the first time in 3 years, Jessica felt like she had a mission that aligned with her training and her moral convictions. Not hiding, not running, not pretending to be someone else, but actively working to ensure justice for the victims of the conspiracy that had destroyed her team. "Colonel Webb, there's something I need to know. My teammates, Rodriguez, Martinez, Thompson, what really happened to their families? Were they told the truth about how they died?" Webb's expression became solemn. Their families were told that they died in a classified operation that served vital national security interests. That was the truth, just not the complete truth. As part of the prosecution process, their families will be fully briefed on the circumstances of their deaths and the importance of the mission they were conducting. For the first time in 3 years, Jessica felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for 3 years. Her teammates' families would finally understand that their loved ones had died as heroes, trying to expose crimes against humanity rather than as casualties of a botched military operation. "One more question, sir. The children from the Syrian facility, what happened to them?" "All 63 children have been located and are receiving medical care and psychological support. The international coalition we've assembled includes humanitarian organizations that specialize in helping victims of human trafficking and illegal experimentation. They'll get the help they need to recover from what was done to them." As Jessica entered the command unit to begin what would undoubtedly be weeks of debriefings and testimony, she realized that her 3-year journey from presumed dead special operations soldier to invisible kitchen worker to key witness in an international conspiracy had finally reached its conclusion. But more than that, she finally understood what Rodriguez had meant when he talked about completing the mission. Sometimes the mission wasn't just about accomplishing the immediate objective. Sometimes it was about ensuring that the people who sent you on that mission would face consequences for betraying everything you'd sworn to protect. Team Trident 7's mission was finally complete, and Jennifer Walsh was ready to come back from the dead to make sure the world knew what they had died trying to expose. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.